In this video, we are going to discuss classical liberalism, one of the approaches to the study of political economy. Now, what is classical liberalism? Before we understand this, what is classical liberalism? Let's take a look at liberalism. What is it, and what do we mean to say when somebody is saying that I'm liberal, somebody is liberal? Here, for our purposes, we can understand it as a political ideology which tries to explain a social reality. It interprets in a certain way, evolves a set of interrelated principles. It contests the nature of the political. And then it goes on to prescribe appropriate action. We need to remember that political ideology is generally action oriented, and so is the case with liberalism. We can say that it has a longer history than most political ideologies. It primarily evolved out of sustained struggles against hierarchically organized social and political relations. In many ways, it captures the ideological map of various political struggles that human beings have witnessed. And this time span covers roughly the last 300 years. Liberalism as a political ideology in modern times is traced back to Enlightenment era. However, liberalism as sort of idea or the idea of liberty or being liberal, the roots of which can be traced back to ancient Greece, and that is not a subject matter for us now. The only difference we can make that during ancient time people used to believe in an active engagement in collective life, and that's how they used to treat liberal attitude towards life within that political community, and for which they were prepared to make sacrifices. Whereas in the modern world, individuals are lost in the multitude and they are unsure of their influence in collective decision making. The happiness of the modern individuals derive more from the comforts gained through civilizational progress, commerce, and communication than finding fulfillment in collective. So, this is one way of distinguishing modern idea of liberty and the liberalism which was prevalent, some authors say, during Greek time. This is how modern idea of liberty is different. In many ways, the earliest liberals were the Protestant reformers when it comes to tracing the history of modern liberalism in the sense which is different from Greek liberalism. We can trace it back to Protestant reformists who challenged religious hierarchy and orthodoxy in the church during the 16th century. In fact, this was a time when it was assumed that if the authority of the priests could be questioned, then how could the king's power be spared? So this was a time when individuals' rights were propagated and the absolute authority of religious and political institutions were being questioned. So the competence of ordinary people to choose their own path to salvation soon transformed into the ability to judge temporal or secular matters. So religious freedom led to a transformation in political worldview. And this coincided with calling into question the divine rights of monarchs and aristocratic privileges of feudal lords in the modern world. Now, much later, the spirit of liberalism expressed political struggles against all forms of absolute authority, including the regimes of oppression as well as fascist, communist, and autocratic. So let's move on to discover what is classical liberalism. Uh, when it comes to the idea of political economy, in the domain of political economy, liberalism emerged along with mercantilism as a reaction against the political economy of medievalism. Now, what is mercantilism? We can state it as that it is a philosophy of political economy that emphasizes the centrality of the state, and this refers not only to a state centric view of the international system but also to the primacy of the state over the domestic actors and interest groups. And this is why there is a difference between mercantilism and liberalism, though both emerged together as a reaction against the political economy of medievalism. And what is medievalism? This was the time when feudal control over trading activities was at its peak, and as a reaction to medievalism, liberalism and mercantilism are emerging. What is the difference between classical liberalism and mercantilism? Contrasting to mercantilism, the roots of liberalism can be traced in the notion that governments can often be too intrusive in a state's economic activity. So here, liberalism is imagining a limited governance, and to recall, we have Locke as one of the founders of modern liberalism and political philosophy. But who are the founders of liberalism and political economy apart from Locke? We will be discovering shortly. So, what is the basic notion behind classical liberalism? How can we understand it? What is the governing idea? The basic notion behind classical liberalism is that government intervention should be kept to a minimum. It emphasizes the role of the individual and the primacy of the mechanism of the free market. So here government's role is limited, restricted. Now there are some key ideas which underlie liberal thought. The first of these is that it puts great value which is to be derived from the free expression of the individual personality. So individual is valued, individual's freedom is regarded as the utmost the most important thing, which is of utmost significance. Now, such expression of individual personality can be made valuable both to those who express it and to society. Now, institutions and policies that protect and foster both free expression and confidence in that freedom must be upheld. So, what this idea of individual freedom is all about, that if we are protecting individual freedom, then confidence in that freedom must prevail in society. So as a reaction to the prevailing mercantilist thought of the day, liberals argued for the inherent value of the individual, and that individual should be able to take part in economic activity which is free from the repression of the state. And what do we gain by doing this? By doing this, liberals believe that a harmony of self-interest between individuals will be achieved. Now, what is the key mechanism for any liberal? We know it, that the key mechanism for any liberal is the market. So when individual is taking part in market activities, it is seen as a positive sum game in which every participant gains. And such kind of notions are found in the work of Adam Smith, and especially his theory of the invisible hand. So let's take a look at who is Adam Smith for a moment, and then we will move on to discover classical liberalism. And of course, we will be referring to other um, economists also who thought about this political dimension of economy. Adam Smith was a Scottish economist, philosopher, and author, a pioneer of political economy and a key figure during the Scottish Enlightenment. He is also known as the father of economics, or, or the father of capitalism. Smith wrote two classic works. One, the theory of moral sentiments, which he wrote in 1759, and an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, which he wrote in 1776, and it is often introduced to us in abbreviated form as the wealth of nations. So what Adam Smith has to tell us about the idea of liberalism with reference to political economy. Smith held that society was such that although individuals did indeed take action that would secure them advantage, the greatest benefit to greater society as a whole would be achieved by allowing them to do so. Individual is trying to secure freedom, but if society is allowing, then the greatest benefit to society would be achieved. Adam Smith goes on to argue that markets should be allowed to function freely based on appropriate division of labor. And doing this will ultimately ensure that efficiency and prosperity are maximized. Although Smith realized that vested interests, especially merchants, benefit from protectionism and will fight to retain the advantages derived from such policies. However, he argued that these specific interests should not be confused with a broader national interest, which is better served by the prosperity flowing from free trade. Contrary to popular belief, however, Smith does not call for unilateral and unconditional free trade. Though he was in favor of free trade, but he was in favor of conditional free trade. It wasn't unilateral or unconditional. So, what are the conditions? Smith is laying down four conditions of free trade. First condition is that free trade may be limited by the needs of national security. Duties should be imposed on foreign goods equal to domestic or natural products in order to avoid offering unfair advantage to imports. Again, the third condition is that duties can be imposed as retaliation for unfair restrictions in foreign markets, but it is prescribed or suggested only as a means of forcing other states to rescind their duties. Retaliation in and of itself does more harm than good. So, duties can be imposed as retaliation for unfair restrictions in foreign markets, just to understand that much. The fourth condition is that free trade should be phased in gradually so that domestic industry and labor have time to make the adjustments necessary to deal with the heightened levels of international competition. Adam Smith thus tempers his argument with an understanding both of the mercantilist practices prevailing at that time and of domestic political realities. Now, this is the view of classical liberalism. So, what basically Adam Smith is telling us is that we should believe in free market economy. The state should not intervene more than what is supposed to be done by the state. Markets should be left free. Society should encourage individuals' freedom to conduct trading activities without any restrictions. State should come into picture only when it is required. Apart from Adam Smith, we have David Ricardo, another political economist of British origin. He lived between 1772 to 1823. Let's take a look at his ideas about political economy from classical liberal perspective. We know and we need to remember that he has written an important work called On the Principles of Political Economy and Taxation in 1817. This is just for our information. Now, what he has to say. In fact, David Ricardo is extending Smith's analysis of international trade and then subsequently developing his Smith's ideas. Now, just to recall, for Adam Smith, the gains to be made from foreign trade were largely based on absolute advantage. Under such circumstances, what happens? Free trade is entirely beneficial. However, Ricardo argued that even if a country did not possess an absolute advantage in the production of a particular commodity, they could still derive gains from foreign trade if that trade was based instead on comparative costs. Thus, to gain the most from foreign trade, nations should concentrate on the notion of comparative advantage. The later comparative advantage has become one of the major identifying concepts in the liberal analysis of trade. We know it. Now, in this view, trade is not based on who can produce the most of any given good, that is, absolute advantage. In this case, the value of the best alternative when a choice is made should be considered. So, the theory of comparative advantage holds that a nation should produce those goods that have a lower opportunity cost than the same goods produced in other countries. A nation should then import goods if the price of the import is less than the opportunity cost of home production, that is domestic production. So Ricardo is revising the methodological ground of Smith's liberalism by separating economic questions from political ones. Although Smith's insights into the way in which free markets work do place individual economic actors in the middle of his analysis, Ricardo lays down the foundation for the methodological individualism that is a hallmark of liberal international political economy. So we find that both Smith and Ricardo are drawing out the implications of comparative advantage and free trade. So these two important thinkers from classical liberalism. And we will be continuing with J.M. Keynes and John Locke in another video.